lied and used fake documents to obtain the interview with my mother, made lurid and false claims about the royal family, which played on her fears and fueled paranoia.
Behind palace walls, a single decision has sent shockwaves through royal history. What began as whispers about money has now hardened into a chilling reality for Prince Harry. Sources claim Meghan's latest move triggered an inheritance freeze no one expected, forcing Prince William to step forward and confirm something even more unsettling. Long before this moment, Princess Diana allegedly warned of a future like this. So, was it coincidence, calculation, or destiny unfolding before our eyes as the monarchy faces its most dangerous turning point yet? Inheritance on ice. In an unprecedented move that has sent shockwaves through the royal family and beyond, Prince Harry's inheritance from his late mother, Princess Diana, has been officially frozen. The announcement made with precision and legal authority was not a response to public gossip, tabloid frenzy, or any lingering personal grievances. Instead, it reflects a careful, deliberate decision by the palace, grounded in law, tradition, and the protection of Diana's carefully constructed legacy. Before the sun rose on January 17, 2026, senior officials at Clarence House quietly but decisively approved the immediate suspension of all distributions from the trust tied to the Duke of Sussex and his dependents. What makes this action so extraordinary is the reason behind it. For the first time in history, a long-dormant clause within Princess Diana's trust, a provision created to safeguard the integrity of her bloodline, has been activated. According to palace sources, this step was not taken lightly. It was triggered by new developments directly linked to Meghan Markle, which raised unresolved questions about the lineage of beneficiaries and their eligibility under the terms Diana herself had set decades earlier. In other words, the palace acted not out of scandal or speculation, but out of legal necessity. A formal statement read under the authority of Prince William left no room for misunderstanding. This was a precautionary measure, a safeguard designed to protect the estate and the integrity of Diana's wishes. It was explicitly not a punishment aimed at Harry, Meghan, or anyone else. Yet, in the language of royalty, the implications are seismic. Activating the clause sends a clear message. This is not a mere controversy to be managed quietly behind closed doors. It is a structural concern, one that touches the very foundations of the royal family's future and the continuity of Diana's carefully curated legacy. Royal observers note that the clause itself is precise and unyielding. It is not concerned with behavior, reputation, or public opinion. Its sole purpose is to ensure biological and legal clarity. Until the emerging questions are fully resolved, no inheritance can flow, no trusts can be distributed, and no assumptions can be made about entitlement. This legal action transforms what might have seemed a private or personal issue into a matter of lasting consequence, one that could redefine how the House of Windsor approaches succession, transparency, and the protection of its most cherished legacies. The freeze of Harry's inheritance marks a moment of rare clarity and unprecedented authority within the monarchy. It is a reminder that even in the modern era, tradition, law, and foresight intertwine in ways that can reshape lives overnight. The palace has spoken. The trust has been secured, and the questions now remain. How will the Duke respond? And what revelations might yet emerge from the shadows of the past? Prince Harry's inheritance from his mother has been blocked due to his wife's suspected lineage issues. But why was Harry's access frozen? Is the palace merely punishing him for stepping away from the family? Or could this action have backing from Diana herself? Let's find out. A warning finally realized. The sudden halt placed on the inheritance traces back to an obscure legal device known as Clause 3, hidden deep within Princess Diana's sealed trust. This clause was never meant to police conduct, manage public image, or punish scandal. Instead, it addresses something far more fundamental: bloodline certainty. Clause 3 exists for one purpose alone: to restrict access to the trust unless biological descent from Diana's sons can be clearly and conclusively proven, especially when questions of lineage arise. For decades, the clause sat untouched, almost forgotten, regarded by palace lawyers as an extreme contingency rather than an active safeguard. Its activation now marks a turning point. By allowing Clause 3 to be enforced, Prince William has acknowledged that Diana's long-dismissed concern was not a poetic fear or emotional intuition, but a deliberate legal precaution designed for exactly this moment. Royal archivists have since confirmed that Diana personally demanded the inclusion of this clause in the mid-1990s during a period when her trust in royal systems had eroded, but her instincts as a mother had sharpened. At the time, she reportedly feared that her youngest son might one day be vulnerable, not to betrayal driven by cruelty, but to confusion created by silence, secrecy, and unanswered questions. She worried that truth, if withheld long enough, could become a weapon without ever being wielded intentionally. When the trust was finalized, Clause 3 was quietly categorized as maternal foresight, an anxious but understandable request from a mother under extraordinary pressure. No one expected it to be used. No one planned for future in which biological verification would be required to unlock what was meant to be a birthright. That future has now arrived. By triggering the clause, William has effectively transformed Diana's private warning into enforceable law. The trust does not accuse, speculate, or assume wrongdoing. It simply pauses. It demands confirmation before proceeding. Until that confirmation exists, access to the inheritance remains suspended, untouched, and immovable. The freeze itself is not a punishment. It is a procedural standstill, a legal breath held in anticipation of clarity. Yet, its implications are profound. What was once a sealed document of protection has become a public signal that questions once avoided can no longer be deferred. In enforcing Clause 3, William has chosen certainty over sentiment, structure over silence. He has allowed his mother's quiet apprehension to step out of the shadows and operate exactly as she intended. And until the truth is formally verified, the inheritance remains locked, guarded not by suspicion, but by a clause written decades ago by a mother determined that truth, whenever it arrived, would finally matter. It is a reminder that even in royal life, time does not erase unanswered questions, and legacies are not only inherited through wealth, but through the courage to confront what history quietly leaves unresolved behind. Unveiling the clause in Diana's will made the freezing of Harry's inheritance possible. But why did the royal family activate such a clause? And what is the legal perception of Diana's action? Now, let's dive into how English law gave Princess Diana the freedom to shape her legacy. Power by design. Under English law, Princess Diana held remarkable control over what would happen to her estate after her death. This power, known as testamentary freedom, gave her the legal right to decide exactly who would inherit her wealth under what circumstances and on what terms. She could set conditions, impose delays, or even exclude individuals entirely if she believed it was necessary. In England and Wales, the law places very few limits on such choices, allowing personal judgment to guide legal design. This freedom stands in sharp contrast to the rules in other parts of the United Kingdom. In Scotland, for example, close family members are guaranteed a portion of an estate regardless of the deceased's wishes. England and Wales offer no such automatic protections. There, a will reflects the mind of its maker almost without interference. For Diana, this meant her estate was not just a financial legacy, but a tool, one she could shape carefully to protect her intentions long after she was gone. Because of this legal reality, Diana was fully entitled to build safeguards into her trust. These were not emotional gestures or symbolic warnings. They were lawful mechanisms written with purpose and foresight. She could require proof, demand verification, or pause distribution if certain conditions were not satisfied. The law allowed her to anticipate uncertainty and plan for it without apology. Clause 3 emerged from this space of freedom. It did not exist outside the law, nor did it push against it. It was carefully constructed, valid in every sense, and firmly rooted in Diana's legal authority. While it may appear unusual to some, it was neither radical nor improper. Many trusts include clauses that delay inheritance until beneficiaries reach a certain age, meet specific requirements, or pass defined checks. Diana's clause simply focused on the certainty of lineage, a concern the law fully permits. What makes Clause 3 striking is not its legality, but its intention. Diana understood that wealth can complicate lives rather than secure them. She believed that inheritance should follow truth, not assumption. The clause was designed to slow things down, not to accuse or condemn. It created space for clarity before access, ensuring that what was passed on rested on firm ground. Far from being imposed by advisors or palace lawyers, Clause 3 was entirely Diana's decision. It reflected her understanding of the system and her determination to use it wisely. She was not reckless with her freedom. She was precise. Every condition was placed with care. Every word chosen to protect rather than provoke. In the end, Clause 3 was not extraordinary at all. It was the natural result of a woman exercising her legal rights fully and thoughtfully. English law gave Diana the power to shape her legacy, and she exercised it with intention, foresight, and resolve. But are there other factors beyond the law that reinforce this action? What additional elements buttress Clause 3? Now, let's uncover the letter from the past. Diana's warning resurfaces. What finally compelled the crown to act was not gossip or public pressure, but a piece of paper written in Diana's own hand. It was a letter, personal and unguarded, written in the summer of 1996 and kept quietly for decades by her former butler, Paul Burrell. During a routine yet unusually deep review of royal inheritances, the letter resurfaced. Its reappearance changed everything. Diana did not write as a princess in that letter. She wrote as a mother who sensed trouble ahead. The tone was calm, but uneasy, filled with a kind of concern that comes from intuition rather than proof. She spoke of protecting her sons not from enemies, but from confusion, secrecy, and truths left unspoken too long. She feared that charm could mask uncertainty and that silence could one day do more harm than lies. In the letter, Diana described a meeting that had stayed with her. While traveling for humanitarian work, she encountered a blind Tibetan mystic. The meeting was brief, yet unsettling. According to Diana, the mystic spoke of futures shaped by hidden divisions, of bloodlines pulled apart, crowns weakened from within, and truth delayed until damage was already done. The warning was not loud or dramatic. It was delivered gently, almost kindly, which made it harder to forget. Diana admitted she did not fully understand the message at the time. Still, she felt compelled to record it. At the end of the letter, she included a short verse written in her own careful script. For years, that verse was dismissed as reflective poetry, the kind of symbolic writing Diana often used to process fear and hope. No one believed it was meant to guide policy or law. That assumption has now collapsed. When legal experts revisited the letter, they noticed that the verse had later been mirrored almost word for word in the symbolic language of Clause 3. What once sounded poetic now reads like instruction. Each line pointed toward delay, verification, and the idea that truth might need protection until it was ready to surface. The letter revealed that Diana had not been guessing. She had been preparing. She understood that the most dangerous threats are not always loud or cruel. Sometimes they arrive quietly, wrapped in grace and good intentions. Her fear was not scandal, but uncertainty passed down like an inheritance of its own. With the letter now authenticated and acknowledged, the Crown could no longer treat Clause 3 as a symbolic gesture. Diana had expected a future where truth would not emerge on its own. She believed it would sleep, hidden and undisturbed, until someone brave enough forced it into the light. That moment has arrived, turning a private letter into a quiet force, reshaping history, duty, and the meaning of inheritance itself today within the royal story. Now again, beyond Clause 3 in her will, Princess Diana had a written letter to support her wishes. But what makes this clause applicable now? Could Meghan be tied to what Diana feared most? Now, let's delve into how one quiet claim timed to the past awakened a sleeping clause. A claim that shook the throne. At the heart of the unfolding crisis stood someone no one had expected. She was not a royal, not a court advisor, and not a media figure. She was a 29-year-old American woman known in legal records only as AM. Until that moment, her name had never appeared in palace files or public debate. Yet, her calm arrival would quietly shift everything. AM did not arrive with anger or spectacle. She was measured, careful, and precise. She claimed in this fictional account to be the biological daughter of Meghan Markle, a claim that immediately carried explosive weight. Her stated birth date, July 1996, placed her existence at a very specific moment in time, a period of transition between youth and adulthood, between one life chapter closing and another beginning. The dates alone demanded attention. What made her presence impossible to ignore was not drama, but detail. AM brought sworn statements, notarized records, and a trail of documentation prepared with almost clinical care. She presented DNA test results reviewed by an internationally respected geneticist who testified within the story that there was a 99% maternal match linking her to the Murley family line. The evidence was laid out not to provoke headlines, but to withstand scrutiny. Strikingly, M asked for nothing that usually fuels such revelations. She did not seek money. She did not claim titles, privilege, or position. There was no request for inheritance, recognition, or public apology. Her stated purpose was narrow and deeply personal. Acknowledgement of truth and access to accurate medical history. She wanted clarity, not compensation. That restraint changed how her claim was received. In this narrative, officials could not dismiss her as opportunistic or reckless. Her tone was steady, her language careful. She spoke less about identity and more about certainty, about the need to know where one comes from and what that knowledge means for health, history, and honesty. The timing of her appearance proved decisive. Her emergence coincided with renewed legal reviews tied to dormant safeguards within royal trusts. The moment M stepped forward, the situation crossed an invisible line. Questions that had once been hypothetical became immediate. Doubt became a process. Silence became impossible. Clause 3, long viewed as a theoretical precaution, could no longer remain asleep. Its purpose was not to judge or accuse, but to pause and verify when lineage questions surfaced. AM's claim, regardless of its outcome, activated that mechanism by existing at all. The crisis was not sparked by scandal, but by precision. One person, armed with documents instead of demands, forced a system built on tradition to confront uncertainty. Whether her claim would be proven or rejected was at that moment secondary. What mattered was that the truth, whatever it was, had been formally invited into the room. And once that invitation was issued, there was no path back to ignorance. The emergence of AM and the claim that has yet to be credibly debunked made Clause 3 applicable. But will her claim undergo further verification? Or is the palace acting purely on emotion? Could there be a past in Meghan's life that sheds light on her claim? Let's uncover the details. The unraveling timeline. As investigators in this imagined account rushed to piece together fragments of the past, a troubling timeline slowly took shape. What emerged was not a single shocking event, but a sequence of quiet details that, when aligned, raised serious questions. At the center of this fictional reconstruction was the suggestion of a hidden Catholic engagement and possibly a brief marriage between Meghan Markle and a man named Joe Giuliano during the mid-1990s. For years, such claims had existed only as whispers. Now, within the story, they were being treated as records worth examining. According to this narrative, the relationship was said to have occurred during a formative period long before any royal connection. What made it especially unsettling was not romance itself, but what followed. Investigators uncovered references to a sealed annulment request submitted to Catholic authorities. Embedded within that request was a mention of an unbaptized child, a detail that, if true in the fictional framework, carried both emotional and procedural weight. Vatican documents, once dismissed as rumor or misinterpretation, were suddenly pulled back into view. Within the story, archivists began reviewing these records not for scandal, but for accuracy. The Church's processes are famously meticulous, and even sealed annulments leave structured trails. If verified, these records would suggest that key elements of personal history had remained undisclosed for decades. The issue was not morality or private choices. It was a process. Royal systems rely on disclosure during vetting, immigration filings, and marriage preparations. Omissions matter as much as false statements. A past marriage, a child, or binding religious commitments are not judged emotionally. They are evaluated legally. Failing to reveal them, even without malicious intent, is treated as a breach of procedure. That distinction became central. Investigators were not searching for guilt, but for completeness. Within royal law, silence can carry the same consequences as deception. The system assumes that all relevant history is placed on the table, allowing decisions to be made with full knowledge. Anything less introduces uncertainty into institutions built on clarity. The implications in this fictional account spread quickly. Questions extended beyond the past and into the present, touching the foundations of legitimacy itself. If earlier disclosures were incomplete, then later claims, especially those connected to lineage, titles, and inheritance, could be affected. The Sussex line, once thought firmly established, suddenly appeared vulnerable to procedural review. What unsettled officials most was not what might be proven, but what had not been examined before. The chronology suggested that truth had not been hidden behind lies, but behind gaps. And gaps, once noticed, demand to be filled. The investigation did not accuse. It paused. It recognized that even long-buried history can resurface when systems designed for certainty encounter unanswered questions. And once those questions are formally asked, tradition offers no shield against the need for answers. The reality of Meghan Markle's past appears aligned with the claim of the woman, making the activation of Clause 3 seem justified. But what consequences could this clause bring for Meghan? What price might she ultimately pay? Let's find out. Collapse on two fronts. As the monarchy shifted into what insiders privately called legacy lockdown, a meticulous effort to control exposure and safeguard succession, Hollywood began to pull back quietly, but unmistakably within the palace. Every move was precise, coordinated, and measured. Prince William ordered the suspension of all references, projects, and financial assets linked to the Sussex branch, cutting ties without fanfare, but with unmistakable authority. Princess and froze charitable engagements that previously involved the couple, ensuring no formal or informal connections remained active. Princess Catherine assumed a posture of deliberate discretion, her public appearances and statements embodying a carefully curated silence that spoke louder than any announcement could. The message was clear. The machinery of the monarchy would continue without disruption, and there would be no shortcuts, exceptions, or distractions. Across the Atlantic, however, the shift played out in a quieter, more fragmented fashion. Meghan Markle's once formidable network of allies, Hollywood insiders, producers, and industry mentors began to unravel almost imperceptibly at first. Tyler Perry, a long-standing supporter, formally stepped back from collaborations. Other high-profile contacts gradually withdrew, some citing scheduling conflicts, others citing professional prudence. Projects that had been in development stalled without explanation. Media platforms paused releases and shelved initiatives. What had once been presented as resilience, a bold assertion of independence and autonomy, now appeared more like isolation, a network of influence slowly evaporating. Within this dual orbit, legal strategy took precedence over narrative control. Silence, which had initially served as a shield against unwanted scrutiny, became a subtle liability. Without proactive communication or reconciliatory gestures, absence from public discourse left space for speculation and growing uncertainty. In Windsor, the approach was defensive but disciplined. Maintain continuity, enforce protocols, and prevent distraction. In Los Angeles, the absence of allies and projects created an unspoken pressure, highlighting the cost of separation in an industry fueled by visibility and momentum. The effect in both cases was a closing of doors, but not with drama, shouting, or spectacle. Instead, closures were quiet, deliberate, and final. Professional, social, and institutional gates were shifting behind the scenes, signaling that previous channels of influence, once taken for granted, no longer operated as expected. In this period, the difference between power and presence became stark. Influence without participation fades, and visibility without access has limits. The monarchy's controlled containment and Hollywood's subtle retreat converged in an unspoken truth. When structures tighten, connections fray, and silence, no matter how strategic, eventually carries its own consequences. The contrast was undeniable. One empire of tradition fortified by discipline, the other a world of visibility slowly withdrawing. And in both the future would be shaped not by statements or declarations, but by the quiet weight of doors left closed. Sussex-linked references and assets were suspended, charitable ties frozen, and industry allies withdrawn due to Meghan's alleged actions. But what will be the fate of Harry in this situation? And will the king step in to rescue his son during this trying time? Now, let's explore Harry's choices and King Charles' rare decree. The Reckoning. By January 18th, the crisis had reached both its emotional and institutional peak, a moment that would be remembered as a turning point in royal history. Prince Harry departed Montecito with quiet resolve, moving without entourage or spectacle. He carried little beyond legal papers, correspondence, and most poignantly, the final will of his mother, Princess Diana, a weighty reminder of both inheritance and expectation. In those documents, carefully preserved for decades, lay the unresolved threads of legacy, love, and lineage. Threads that now demanded resolution. Inside Buckingham Palace, the air was heavy with the rare tension of a system forced into extraordinary measures. King Charles, drawing on legal powers seldom exercised, activated dormant provisions designed to halt recognition of descendants whose claims were disputed or uncertain. The mechanisms had existed for centuries, but were rarely needed. Today, they were unavoidable. Palace officials moved with precise efficiency. Archives consulted, letters verified, and protocols followed, each step measured to protect both tradition and continuity. Amid this controlled chaos, Paul Burrell, Diana's longtime butler and confidant, stepped forward to deliver the last sealed letter from the princess herself. In her meticulous, heartfelt words, Diana had anticipated the moment that had now arrived, a choice that her youngest son would face between the pull of love and the weight of legacy. Her insight, written decades earlier, was no longer theoretical. It was reality. Harry's challenge, long foreshadowed in private correspondence, had become unavoidable. The intersection of family duty, inheritance, and personal truth. Later that evening, the world watched as King Charles addressed the nation. His words were sober, measured, devoid of sensationalism. There was no dramatization of scandal, no indulgence in gossip. Instead, he spoke of stewardship, responsibility, and the necessity of clarity. No inheritance without verification, he said. No restoration without certainty. The speech, though brief, carried the weight of centuries, a reminder that the monarchy survives not through individual desire, but through adherence to law, tradition, and careful management of lineage. As the palace lights dimmed, one phrase quietly reverberated through the corridors, whispered in the halls where generations of royalty had walked. Sometimes, to protect the crown, you must let go of the prince. It was not meant as judgment, but as acknowledgement of the hard truths that come with duty. In that moment, the story of fairy tale inheritance of seamless succession came to an end. What followed was not spectacle but reckoning. A careful, painful, and deliberate process of verification and decision. Families, legacies, and lines of succession would all be examined under a new lens of scrutiny. The monarchy's survival depended on clarity and truth, no matter how difficult. For Prince Harry, the path forward was uncertain. For the crown, the message was clear. History, law, and duty would now define the story, and there would be no shortcuts. The reckoning had begun. So, what do you make of Harry's inheritance being frozen because of Meghan's actions? Could they both survive this trying time? We would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to like and subscribe.